sure that those are up so that I can actually make sure that I'm showing you the right stuff and we're talking about the right things. Um, and I am over on YouTube if you want to find me over there for when comments are turned off here in TikTok. It's going to be difficult to try and figure out. I'm looking at how to do both TikTok and YouTube through the same thing, but I can't seem to do TikTok on my computer because of the fact that it seems like you need like a streaming key to do TikTok on your computer. And I do not have that. Let's see. Nope. No. Okay, I just had these up. Let's start with the one that we've seen with. There we go. Open in a new tab. The cassowary ones was pretty cool. There's a couple others that I wanted to go over, but I hadn't put them behind me yet. One of them is that Nubian technology is actually associated with Neanderthals in the southernmost regions of the Neanderthal regions. Okay, let's see if I can get all three of these up that we want to talk about today. So this is the end of my year, and I'm trying to make sure that everything is set up in specific ways where we're actually working through having some sort of a schedule just so that people can know when and where to find me. And I'm trying to get a few things up and going, but if you've been around for a minute, you know that it's extremely difficult for me to try and get things to work sometimes. It's really difficult. Where did I find these at in here? I've got them bookmarked. But in the things that can be really difficult for me, it can also be it can take me a minute at a time to do things. Oh, I'm sorry. I just can't, it's not working. Hey, Benevolent. Okay, so sorry, I left you guys. Well, I'm just trying to do this and I'm not getting it up. I'm doing pretty good, everybody. The pick is Chatterman. He is a Briton, and he was found in Britain. He's part of a group of people that look like him, all sharing the same haplogroups, mitochondrial haplogroups, that were in southern Britain about 10,000 years ago. And they all look roughly like this. They're all dark-skinned with blue-eyed. And the genetic markers for the dark skin is the same. It's identified as verbally in the articles as being sub-Saharan in its color. And this is pretty much what Europe looks like up until a few thousand years ago. The vast majority of people are dark of skin with light eyes. The light eyes are a low light adaptation, and they come first within us. I'm doing really good. Is the background backwards? Thank you for letting me know. For some reason, that's not the one thing I wanted to do. That's the one thing I wanted to do. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry I hadn't looked over there. Great to see you, Benevolent. The audio and the video are not in sync. Gobekli Tepe. Did you see that they found a new tepe that is like, they've actually found two. So that's another thing that I was going to bring up and talk about. I haven't put them on the image yet, but they have found two recent tepes, or two recent spaces in that area within Turkey. One is like a village at 13,000 years ago. And I had it up. Oh, I think I just shut it down. But there's a village that they found that's like 13,000 years ago in Turkey. Um, and so it predates Göbekli Tepe and it predates the other Tepe that's like no, that's the village. I'll find it in a second and I'll bring up the other Tepes. I get my information from scientific journals. I am a scientist. I'm an archaeologist. I have a link tree in my bio and it has links to my sources. It's gotten quite populated, so it involves a little bit of scrolling, but I try and put everything under tabs. I'm working on a better way to give you guys bibliographies of my sources. And that's one of the things that I'm working on towards the end of the year. They have light eyes because light eyes are a low light adaptation. And it's the first thing that they were able to get adaptation. It's the first adaptation that they were able to have within Europe. So the reason that you see that their skin tone adapts from dark to light. So recently we found that the skin tone, the gene for light skin, is actually about 9,000 years old. So it really, or 900,000 years old. So it really predates Homo sapiens even. And you see that it's really even within Homo erectus, right? So they've recently done genomics, finding out that that gene itself is like 900,000 years old. So it's predating us. But they also find that what it is this ability that we have to our skin tone, the melanin content within our skin tone, depending on the environment that it's in. And adaptations take about 100 generations or about, sorry, I'm trying to make sure that all these cameras are right. 100 generations or about 2,500 years. And so we see that we start to adapt the blue eyes before we start to adapt the light skin. But it is absolutely an adaptation that takes time. You know, you have to have that 100,000 years to get there, or not 100,000 years, sorry, that 2,500 years, 100 generations. Have a great one. Bye. And it's not a mutation. It's just we have that genetic ability. It's not necessarily that it's a mutation. The genetic advantage within hominins, within Homo species, is for us to be able to adapt our skin tone because we've lost our hair. And so we need to adapt our skin tone to make up for that loss of hair to protect us in certain environments. And like I was saying, that adaptation is about 900,000 years old, right? That ability to adapt to light skin. Light skin starts within us about 900,000 years old. Again, this predates us, this predates Neanderthals. But that ability is the genetic advantage. And having the different skin tones in different environments is the genetic advantage that allows us to make it across the globe and allowed Homo erectus to make it across the globe too. Without those, you don't see that. I have a link tree in my bio that has all of my sources. I do need a video editor, but I need somebody who will teach me how to edit videos so that I can do it for myself so I don't have to depend on others on it. Otherwise, I worry because I don't like I don't like having other people do things for me sometimes. But if you would like to help, that would be really great. Um, I followed you back. Thank you. I appreciate. And like I said, I need help because I'm trying to learn. And I've gotten the ability to put like I'm on YouTube right now streaming. We're streaming over there as well. I don't think there's anybody watching over there. And I'm trying to work it into my next. So my next things that I'm working on are a website. Setting up a T-shirt account so that I can put some things that people have asked me to put on T-shirts, and then also doing a podcast off of Spotify. Shut up. Okay, so as Native Americans, how many mountains do we have? I mean, to be real, I grew up within a community, an indigenous community that lives in the mountains next to the sea because I grew up in the Cascades on the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest, and the mountains and the sea are like just miles from each other, and we lived in all of them there. So So, I mean, we did all live in mountains here in the Turtle Islands. Absolutely. Like, there's plenty of evidence of us in different mountains here in the Turtle Islands. Um, there is a lot of proof that Turtle Island indigenous people have been here over 33,000 years. And there's also proof that Homo erectus made it to Turtle Island and speciated here in Turtle Island, which would confirm some indigenous people's stories of being created here, right? And the species they speciated here into would be a species like Neanderthal or Denisovian that we bred with. And Turtle Island indigenous DNA has a ghost species within it, which means that would double down and confirm that Homo erectus made it here and speciated, right? And if you look at that, you see that Turtle Island indigenous people also have legends of coming, or myths, creation myths of coming over on boats, have creation myths of falling from the sky, right? So all of these different creation myths actually are supported within the DNA of Turtle Islanders, right? But Turtle Islanders are absolutely Homo sapien. If we're not all the same species, we saw what they did with race, and race has been debunked. Race is a colonial construct that white people created to justify the atrocity that they were committing against Black and brown people, right? And we see what they did with the idea that race existed. What would they do if they thought that we were different species? Putting us into different species categories is othering us, and it gives white people the ability to kill us. So please don't do that. So I'm not going off a hypothesis. So I do want to state that up front. So when you look at what science is, and indigenous people have all had science across the globe well before science as this new construct comes in, and it's not really good science. I mean, we know Western science is blind, but science is, I see it in nature, I observe, I have a hypothesis, I think what that can mean. I predict what that might work, how I might get that to work, and then I test it. And if I test it and it proves true, it becomes a theory, right? If I test it and it proves false, I have to go back to the hypothesis. Hypothesis is something that hasn't been proven by fact. I have stuff that all the evidence that I have supports that fact, right? This is accepted fact currently. Now, accepted fact changes. Absolutely. And I'm not going to say it doesn't. And I'm always accountable. If it changes tomorrow, it changes tomorrow. I'll bring in the new information. That's what I do. But current accepted fact is we are all one species with a lot of different admixture from different species in us, but we're all the same humans. And if we look at it as any different than we're all the same humans, we wouldn't be able to breed. We wouldn't be able to have children together if we weren't the same species. That's just a common fact. Two species can't have children together commonly. Usually it's only in one way. Like they believe that it was Neanderthal males and Homo sapien females that bred. And usually those are the only ones that are actually able to have children. And of those children, few are viable, right? So we absolutely know, though, that we are all the same species. There's nothing that, I mean, we breed, we have babies easily. There's no reason we're not the same species. Okay, so no, accepted fact is subject to new information. So theory, because theory is always constantly tested. And okay, so like the theory of relativity, we're still testing the theory of relativity. The theory of gravity is not accepted as a common theory. The law of gravity is a law, but how gravity happens is currently a theory, and we're constantly retesting what we think is the theory of gravity. And when it shows that it's not right, we adjust the theory of gravity, right? Okay, so you don't bring your ideas that RH factor has anything to do with speciation is completely false. Just completely wrong. RH factor has nothing to do with speciation. An RH negative mom can have, well, the problem is if an RH negative mom on her second pregnancy has an RH positive child, because the first pregnancy has taught her this is an allergy. This is an allergic reaction. That's all this is. It's an allergic reaction. RH factor is nothing more than an allergic reaction. So you like your first bee sting, you're not allergic to. But if you develop an allergy off of that first bee sting, then you're allergic to the next bee sting. Okay. So you have to have that first bee sting to develop the allergic reaction. So with a pregnant woman who is Rh negative, the first pregnancy, whether it's an Rh negative pregnancy or an Rh positive pregnancy, is fine. If she has the first Rh positive pregnancy, then the next Rh positive pregnancy causes problems within her body as allergic reactions. Her immune system attacks it just like any other allergic reaction, right? So it is not anything to do with the different species. It is, and also like, okay, so like when they talk about your blood type and your Rh factor, your blood cell, they're not even looking at that. They're looking at the outside. And they call antigens along the outside of your blood cell. This is how they type A, B, and O, right? And A, B, and O is like the type, but you can have any combination. Like there's A, B, there's A, there's B, there's O, right? So this is how they type A, B, and O, right? But it's also how they type RH. And there's 49 factors of the RH, 49 antigens of RH. And one RHD, capital D, because there's several D's. There's a capital D and a small d. RH capital D. If you are missing RH capital D out of all the RH factors, then you are RH negative. And so your blood type might be type A, and then your RH factor would be negative, and so you would be A negative, right? But again, this is just an allergic reaction to something you don't have in your body, because you're lacking that something, and when it's introduced to you, you have an allergic reaction to it. And again, it doesn't happen in the first positive pregnancy of an Rh negative woman. It happens in the consecutive or following pregnancies in an Rh negative woman. And so it has nothing to do with speciation. We are not on any level separate species. I know that this is something that you all want to believe. It's this need to be special. It's your need to be special. And the fact of the matter is this need to be special is harming us, right? We're not special. We have a purpose. Like every other animal on this planet, we have a purpose. And our purpose is to be a part of the ecosphere, right? Our purpose is to be a part of the biosphere. And our purpose within that part of the biosphere is to tend the biosphere, to ensure that it goes forward in positive ways. Our purpose is to so an animal that eats grass, mowing the field or eating the grass in the field, gives life to the next generation of that grass, right? When we harvest along pruning cycles, words sometimes don't work very much, sorry. When we are harvesting along pruning cycles, which is the way we're supposed to be harvesting, we're helping those plants grow, right? When we take out the elderly animals, we're helping those animals develop into further space, right? So when you are doing what is called honorable harvest in many indigenous communities, when you're doing something called honorable harvest, which is how we all practiced before, we have this space in the niche, right? In the biosphere. When we fulfill our space in that biosphere, that's what we're supposed to be doing here, right? We're supposed to be tending this garden that we helped create. Okay. But we had a bunch of narcissistic god kings that wanted you to worship them so that you would give them shit and they could sit on their ass. And so they created this theory and this idea of othering, right? And they gave you something to hate and told you were special. And this starts 10,000 years ago, and it's only 10,000 years old. And that's only in the Middle East. Like it becomes over time across the globe, but even now there are spaces that it's not a part of, right? And so that's what gave you your idea that there was others and that you are special. And this really doubles down when you get into Christianity, because Christianity teaches you you're God's chosen. Even though God didn't choose Christians, God chose the Jews. God doesn't want the Christians. He didn't choose the fucking Christians. They appropriated his people's religion, right? They stole from his people. Why the fuck do you think God wants you? Like, that's just not real. Like, God is the God of the Judaic people. He's not the God of the rest of the world. And the only people that Yahweh chose are the Judaic people. Those are his people. Yahweh speaks about being a part of a pantheon. Yahweh speaks about there being other people, but he chooses the Judaic people, the 13 tribes. And in his choice of the 13 tribes, those are his people. We're not. You can't convert and become his. He doesn't want you. But the idea that you're special really doubles down in that, right? The idea that you're special really doubles down when the Romans appropriate Judaism and use it to colonize the world, right? And use it to conquer the world, including the people that they appropriated their religion from, right? And to just try and destroy them, right? But we are just a part of this biosphere, right? We're a part of this world. And if we allow ourselves to be the part of the world that we are, then we can stop the climate destruction that we're causing with Western agriculture and corporations destroying the planet, right? But we have to understand that we are seriously just a part of this biosphere, right? We're not special, we're not set above. And I understand that need to feel special, especially if you're coming from a group of people who have historically been maligned, right? Historically been harmed. You absolutely, need that uplift to feel like you're special because for so long you've been told you're less than, right? Or historically, familially, ancestrally, right? For so long. And have that uplift is very real. I would posit that a connection to the world around you and community will make you feel way better than the idea that you're special and unique. Because as long as you're fighting to be special and unique and to break the glass ceiling or to break the ceilings that are set by white people trying to justify the atrocities that they're committing against you or your ancestors, I'm not trying to break a glass ceiling. I'm turning it to leaves, right? I don't need your fucking ceiling. I don't need your fucking structure. It was wrong from the start. I'm here to dissolve it, right? I'm here to change it. I'm not here to break into it. I don't want to be a part of it because that shit's nasty, right? I would posit that you are going to feel much happier or much more this rate of depression that we all have because we live in this nasty shit, right? I would posit that you will find less of that disconnect and that depression if you stop trying to be special or better than the white people and return to and I'm not trying to I'm just saying when we're talking about different species, right? Like I'm not trying to tell people who to be, but um trying to be them, we don't want to be them. They're fucked up. They think it's okay to justify atrocity, right? They think it's okay to hate. They think it's okay to other. That's not who any of us were. That's not even who they were, right? I'm here to teach even them that that's not who they were, right? Um, Trying to be that, trying to be separate, trying to be special, trying to other people, trying to create rift, trying to create division, trying to create a specific advanced group of people um, only doubles down and contributes to it, right? It only doubles down and contributes to the idea that there is a supremacy when there's not, right? But sidetracked, as always, this is why we don't use comments. I do want to talk about a few things today that are newer finds and newer discoveries. Then the first one that I want to talk about is Neanderthal. We talk a lot about Neanderthal in here. We do a lot of paleoanthropology. Paleoanthropology is a fascination for me. It's always been a fascination since I was little. It's probably, one of my first outside of my, communal teachings that I got. Neanderthals is one of the first things that I was fascinated by. My grandmother was really into them. The one that raised my mother, so her grandmother, and that grandmother was very, paleoanthropological, and I really had a fascination from that. She taught me a lot of my fascinations. But when we are looking at the Neanderthals, often we want to know, why did they go extinct? Many people don't understand that the Neanderthals were around. So we as a species have only been here about 300,000 years. Neanderthals as a species were around 300,000 years when we as a species start, right? So Neanderthal as a species is about 600,000 years old. And we see that Neanderthal as a species starts or is 300,000 years old when we as a species come onto the playing field. So Neanderthal as a doesn't really go extinct and we stuck around. It's that we haven't even hit half of their life. Well, we've hit half of their life cycle now, right? And so we see that with Neanderthal, we're definitely looking at an extremely long-lived and an extremely advanced group of people, just like Homo erectus is an extremely long-lived and an extremely advanced group of people. But this new evidence shows that at like 235,000 years ago and at 100,000 years ago, there were two climatic events that pretty much came close to driving Neanderthals extinct, and they were able to bounce back to this. Let me see if I can pull up the site. That's what I was looking at a hot minute ago. Um, and when, or what I was trying to do a hot minute ago when I ended up coming into the group. When we're looking at this, I think that what this tells me and what it really becomes imperative to me about this is our possibilities, right? Because it talks about there become a very small population and then become large again, or at least larger again. And to me, that's really imperative when we look at us now. Often we talk about, is that something that we're going to be able to do? If we run into this apocalyptic event, then if we run into apocalyptic event, we often think that we're going to have a small group of Homo sapiens that survive after it, which is quite possible. But are we going to be able to come back? Right? Like, how many people do we need to have enough of a genetically diverse population to be able to come back? Um, which can be really interesting because we know that like Neanderthals ended up at the very end to have an extremely narrow genetic code, right? An extremely narrow genetic diversity, which we currently think is part of why they bred with us. And if that's the case, we know that like so when Columbus landed in the Turtle Islands, he took the Taino people from about 10 million people to about 10,000 people in the course of 2 years. Like he committed this mass horrific genocide based on the doctrine of discovery. And he really, really, really fucked us over, right? Um, but we know that at 10,000, that wasn't enough genetic diversity to continue along the Taino people. And so this is why we know that there's a lot of admixture within Taino population now, because the Taino people had to seek that admixture. They had to go outside of their group of people so that they would not end up being inbred. They would not end up, being very narrow genetically diverse. Because when you have a narrow genetic diversity, off. I was reading it on my phone. It is on my phone. If I shut down the thing on my phone, I'd be able to pull the bloody thing up. And still, I cannot find it over on my computer. Um, when we narrow genetic diversity, a group cannot continue unless they get that outside admixture. And so we know that Neanderthals in the end bred with us because they're getting that outside admixture, but it looks like maybe they have such a narrow diversity, not because of the fact that they started out genetically diverse, but because they may have had two extinction level events, basically, or two, events where they almost went extinct, which would significantly narrow down their diversity. So after the Neanderthals, what we're talking about with on the back here is a very recent find of cassowary eggs within Australia. And in this find of cassowary eggs within Australia, what they're showing is that the ancient Australians at 18,000 years ago, looks like actually were raising these birds. So there's a few different things that we see even today that are done with the cassowary birds. Let me try. Are there bookmarks? Is that maybe? Nope, it's in there. What we're seeing with this is that a lot of times they'll take the cassowary eggs and just cook the eggs. Like they'll let the eggs, if you can incubate the eggs until the bird within the egg grows to a specific point, then you will cook the egg with the bird still inside. It's a specific type of like delicacy in many populations that has been a delicacy for hundreds of thousands or thousands of years at this point. But what it looks like is that the Australian indigenous people would actually take the eggs, and when they would take the eggs, they would incubate them until they get to a point where they are until they get to a point where they're either that developed bird within so that they can cook the egg like that, or they get to the point that they actually hatch. And it looks like with what they found that there are several that they were actually hatching. And so it looks like they were actually raising cassowary birds at 18,000 years. So this would be our first evidence of animal husbandry, our first evidence of animal raising within us, which really to me is pretty awesome. I love looking at the fact that a lot of these things come from different spaces. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and turn on comments. It might pause the live, but I'm going to flip over really quick and find where those were that I was looking at. Okay, that one did not want to. Hey guys, hey. Sorry. Still 1 second, sorry. Nope, that's not it. I don't know if you guys see me. It's actually pause the live. Yeah, I'm not going to do it that way. I just don't like putting it like that. Yeah, we were talking about cassowaries. My degrees come from Portland State. My degree in medicine comes from Apollo, though. Don't hate. Oh yeah, the DMs didn't come in. Hold on. Oh shit. So I'm not using my headphones today to try and keep it in sync a bit better. Because I think sometimes my headphones pop it out of sync. But if you don't know, the Pacific Northwest is in the middle of an ice storm. And so this is what outside looks like. And it is covered in snow and ice. So my internet is probably actually really, really spotty today, unfortunately. So I am sorry if my audio and I'm not surprised. Sometimes it is. There's the other one that I wanted. But I can't. All right, I don't know what I can do about it because the internet, I think even my internet is spotty today. Like my house internet is spotty today. I'm going to try and just Google search it and pull it back up just so that I can. There we go. I had the other two, but I couldn't find that one. There we go. So yes, thank you so much. And I'm sorry, I'm sure for me personally, if I watch my videos and the audio is off, it totally fucks with my head. So I apologize. I don't think I can fix, but I apologize for the annoyance because it is very distracting. I'd laugh because people are like, the things in your nose distract me. And I'm like, the things in my nose don't distract me, but my audio being off will distract me all day long. Okay. So the mutation, it's not a mutation, and dark skin starts first. We're all originally dark. Nice, Erica. That's cool. So let me tell you how they've decided that Neanderthals almost went extinct twice. I've pulled up the article, I found it. Um, what they're doing is they extracted DNA from prehistoric hominins from soil within caves. And what they're seeing is that when they're looking at that fragment of genetic material, um, the it indicates population replacements, meaning in the Turtle Islands, when you totally remove a group of people and you put a new people in, right? So like with the Trail of Tears, like where there's the replacements within Turtle Island in space. So what we're looking at is these radical replacements within Eurasia. And once is at 135,000, not 235. Sorry about that. 135,000 years ago, and once is at 130,000. They're believing that this is because of population cooling effects, because we know during these time periods that there are glaciations happening, right? There's ice ages happening. We as a planet cycle through ice ages frequently. Rapid cooling and rapid warming, like we're going through now, happens naturally. We are destroying our livability on the planet as well with Western agriculture and with the corporations that are just really kind of destroying the planet itself, right? So we are kind of destroying our livability on the planet as well. But there is climate change. Climate change is a misnomer because climate change happens. Climate destruction is what we're doing. So Neanderthals were affected by this prior climate change, and we knew this already. We knew that Neanderthals left Europe and had to move down to the lower parts of Europe, and that they had to do this in every ice age. We knew that Neanderthals had been in Britain, and then the ice age had come, and everything had to leave Britain, and it was all covered in ice. And then the ice receded, but Doggerland, that space between mainland Europe and Britain, was covered by water with that recession. And so Neanderthals never made it back to Britain. We see Neanderthals in Britain 400,000 years ago, but we don't see them after the last ice ages. And the reason we don't see them after the last ice ages isn't because they were in other areas within Europe in the last ice ages, but because there was no way to get to Britain, right? So we've known for a minute that we are seeing them move out. But we didn't really grasp the fact that we're getting to two spaces where the populations are shrinking and then revibrating from that, or regenerating from that shrunken population. I don't know what you guys are talking about. As we were just discussing, you might be seeing some differences. This is probably going to be because of my weather. I'm in the middle of an ice storm. I'm in the Pacific Northwest. Um, Monogamy is a really new thing. I doubt that they were monogamous. Awesome, Baya. The Pacific Northwest is where I've lived most of my life, but I've moved all around the Pacific Northwest. Okay, so the reason that they're going extinct a couple times before is absolutely because you're seeing this ice age coming in. And so not getting out of space fast enough, not adapting, not moving down, not having enough space in the lower areas, populations decrease. And so what they're seeing is that there is this decrease of the population both times, it seems that the decrease of the population is caused by the cooling of the climate and a temporary decimation of the local hominin groups within that area. This is all coming out from the Max Planck Institute. For those who do not know, Pablo Svante Pablo actually is the person who just won the Nobel Peace Prize for his DNA advancements, because he advanced DNA genetic testing with his PCR invention, polymerase chain reaction, which allows you to duplicate DNA, which is how we're able to do genomic sequences on ancient hominins. And so Max Planck Institute is the institute that he's always worked out of. So this is his institute. This is where he heads. So anything coming out of there is using all of the latest techniques and has a lot of weight behind it usually. And so what we see is that both times the conditions improve and surviving lineages of the Neanderthals manage to repopulate. And so what we're going to see is that, like, say you have a group of Neanderthals pre 200,000 years ago, and you see 5 different mitochondrial DNAs and 5 different Y DNAs in this group at 200,000 years ago. And that at 135,000 years ago, when this first extinction thought process happens, we lose all but 2 of each, like 2 mitochondrials and 2 Y DNA lines, right? Because these are DNA lines. Mitochondrial DNA is your DNA line, your genetic line, right, through your mother, and Y DNA is your genetic line of males through the father, right? And so say we lose all but 2, right? And then we see the population regrow and we gain back, because when you so like we all started with the same mitochondrial DNA as us, and then as we move out of Africa, certain groups die and only certain groups survive on, right? And so we develop new mitochondrial DNA lines, right? And so of these 2 mtDNA lines and 2 Y-DNA lines, say we get another 10 of each. So now we have 10 mitochondrial DNA lines and 10 Y-DNA lines. And then at 100,000 years, we see it go down to 2 mitochondrial DNA lines again, and down to 2 Y DNA lines again. And then we see that they try and build that back up, but then they go extinct at 40,000 years. And we know at 40,000 years ago that their genetic diversity was extremely low, extremely low. We also know, though, that we started mixing with them before this. Like, so if they've gone through 2 extinction events at 135,000 years ago and 130,000 years ago, we were living with Neanderthals within the Levant area at 150 to 200,000 years ago, and we lived with them there for 100,000 years. So we do know that they're still surviving within certain areas. It's just the areas that they're surviving are then going back up after these ice ages happen and repopulating. The dryads and the ages and the stages don't correlate very well in my mind. So when you say younger dryads, I don't remember exactly which period of time we're talking about. Unfortunately, I have to go by like thousands of years ago for me, because it's the only thing that translates right. A lot of that is like the new Stone Age and the old Stone Age have a tendency to be weird, like one's here and one's there. And, like it just doesn't correlate well. So if you can give me a date, and then if you can tell me what theory you're talking about, Brad, I can give you an opinion on it. But I have a lot of junk in my head. Like I've got a lot of stuff in my head and a lot of different articles and a lot of different current stuff coming out. It's hard for me to keep track of things if I don't know. Like I have no clue what you're talking about just by that statement, Brad. But if you would clarify, I'd be happy to answer if I understand, or if it's something I know what's going on with. I don't know. Okay. Wow. Thank you, Sinner. uh, okay, so thank you, Eva. Yeah, bio, right? Like, and this is 18,000 years ago, and it's talking about them actually going out and getting the eggs and then incubating the eggs. And there's show that they're incubating some of the eggs to cook the eggs themselves, and that some of the eggs are incubating to actually, because they don't have fire, fire stain on the eggshell, right? They don't have evidence of being burned on the eggshell, and so because of that, they're saying that some of these are actually, incubated to life so that they could actually raise. Oh, okay. So I have seen some stuff on that, but I haven't looked into it too deeply. Um, So we know that the last ice age doesn't fully end until like 10,000 years ago. Like Ireland's not out from underneath the ice until about like 8,000 years ago. And the same with like Scandinavia and stuff like that, right? So we know that like the ice ages don't really end until then. But I had roughly heard, I hadn't looked too deep into that. So this is stating that it's hitting here in Turtle Island. I'm reading from Science Direct. This is an accredited institution, and this is a journal article out of them, which looks pretty accredited. Um, it's a climatic episode, but they're stating that this actually is demise of the Clovis culture. I do know that we don't see that the Clovis culture actually has like a demise. We just see kind of an advancement forward within the Clovis culture. So I'm not sure with that demise thought process. Um, I am totally down with the idea though that we're having like small climatic events that cause mass destruction. I'll look into this a little bit more. I had seen it come across. I just haven't looked deep into it because it's not something like an area of focus usually for me. Like I don't usually focus on climatic stuff at that time period. Usually I focus on cultural stuff in that time period in the shift and how that affects climate instead of like outer climate things. But I can go ahead and take a look at it and see a little bit more on it. I would state that all of my knowledge with Clovis states that Clovis itself isn't actually like disappearing, like the people don't disappear. It just morphs, like it becomes a new culture where we see this happen like everywhere, where it's just comes a new culture, right? We see cultures will often you'll get an outside influence that will change a culture, or you will get just a new knowledge that will change a culture, right? And actually, I do know, like, we recently found pottery that predates the invasion of Europe here in Turtle Island. And it's like a couple, like 2,000, 3,000 years old, right? So I do know that there's a couple new finds within Turtle Island that look at stuff like that. But I haven't seen anything new that suggests, I mean, other than this might suggest that there's actually like a demise of the Clovis culture as like as a people and instead of a change of a culture. But I'll look into it a little bit more for you and see what it is. Well, we will make it through if we make changes. I think that we have to remember that we have to make changes within what's going on. Because so this has been going on for like 10,000 years, and this isn't us. We're 300,000 years old. So if it's been going on for 10,000 years, we made this shift into this. Now we need to make the shift out of this. This experiment started failing when we started it, right? Like it's been failing since the very beginning, and so we have to acknowledge that as scientists, as people, we have to acknowledge that didn't work. Let's try something new and shift into another way. So a lot of people think of hunter gatherers and they look at hunter gatherers. They don't realize that collector exists within hunter gatherer, right? So what we're looking at is an animistic tradition that you see two different types of people. You see hunter gatherers and you see what we call collectors. And collectors have a central unit that they stay in, and they go out during different times of year and harvest from different areas. They might go and camp in that area for a few weeks. The salmon run is happening. They're going to go camp at the river for the salmon run or things like that, right? And then they go back to the village that they've built. And we definitely see villages going back 13,000 years in an archaeological record, but we would assume that villages go back further than that because any community is really a village, right? Even if it's a moving community, even if it's a hunter-gatherer community. We find a lot of times, even hunter-gatherer communities, hunter-gatherers return to the same place every year. Sometimes they'll return to, if this is pre-building houses, maybe they're returning to the same exact cave every year. Like every spring, this is their spring cave. We do see a lot of cultures will actually have a house in an area and they return to that house specifically every year. In spaces where they don't, you'll see where there's like a mile radius where they might camp here this year and here this year and here this year. But we tend to think of it a lot differently than it really is. Because what we're looking at is not like just random wanderings. What we're looking at is following like any other animal, like we are following the seasonal patterns. And we also don't seem to understand that even hunter-gatherer timelines have collective cultures, right? Cultures that don't migrate, but they go to the spaces during the different portions of the season and bring it back, right? And so we want to take a look at that and make sure. And another thing that I see often come across is the word tribal being this negative as this violent thing, right? Whereas tribal is not a violent act, right? Most tribal communities are communities that are very nurturing, right? You actually see a lot less orphan, you see a lot less starvation, homelessness, things like that within a tribal community because most tribal communities are communal, right? They're very ethically and morally about maintaining the community as a whole because the maintenance of the community as a whole advances the community as a whole. If you let people slip through the cracks of that advancement, then you're losing valuable members of your society because all members of society are valuable, right? So we definitely see that, I definitely hear a lot of times tribal as a negative, right? As a violent, as a war mongering thing. But really, we don't get war mongering until we get cities. Nations are war mongering, tribes are not. Tribes have no need to battle, right? Oftentimes, you'll even see that tribes that do have war games have a tendency to not actually like kill each other, like Counting Coup being way more honorable in Plains Nations and Turtle Island than we see, you don't want to kill somebody. If you've killed somebody, you're actually a coward because it's more honorable and more brave to tap them and turn your back and walk away, right? That takes a lot of courage and a bravery to leave an enemy standing, right? Whereas killing your enemy takes no courage, no value, no honor, no valor, right? But killing your enemy and turning your back and walking away, that's some fucking killer courage, right? So we see a lot of, even in the warrior spaces, that warriors aren't about killing people, they're about, honor and valor and courage, right? Protection and defense. That it's not about going out and killing off groups. It's about being able to defend your space and your people. And it's about it's about the game. It's about the honor of it. It's about it's not about death. There's not a death sentence from going to war, right? Like in fact, it is less. You're less if you're killing, right? And so we absolutely see that, the idea that tribes and that tribal is warfare is absolutely false. We definitely see that tribal people are absolutely way more communal, and we definitely see that tribal groups are absolutely way less inclined to kill, way less inclined to kill until you get to nations. So the entire globe, though, does have this indigenous hunter-gatherer collector cultures prior to the advent of agricultural based cities based on stratification in agriculture, somebody ruling and somebody being in a low class or caste to provide for somebody to rule over them, right? Ethiopia does have the oldest church, and actually, Ethiopia is some of the earliest Christianity we have on record, right? And that is because Rome was really connected to Ethiopia. Like, so that's another thing that we're going to talk about. Let's actually go into that. When we look at, oh, that's, yeah, solitude, absolutely. When we look, what do I mean by human proxy? I didn't say human proxy. Did I? I don't think I've used the word proxy at all. Um, so I don't teach Indigenous culture at all. That's not my lane. It's not my space. I am Turtle Island Indigenous, but I don't actually belong to a nation. I have connections and family within nations, right? And things like that, and I belong to families, but I don't actually belong to a nation. And I'm not a culture keeper. I do not teach Indigenous culture. Oh, okay. Thank you, product. I appreciate that. I was like, what the? I didn't say that. So I have not read Sapiens the book. I recently did download it to try and read it. Um, I do know that I saw like a documentary based on it. I do not know the whole of it, but what I do know is that there is evidence that they've given in there that we killed the Neanderthals. And the evidence that was given within the documentary, the bone that was shown does not look like what they're stating it looks like. And so I have an issue with that. I did radiography before I did archaeology. And so bones is something I've had a lot of experience with, especially injury on bones. And when you look at the injury to that bone, it does not look like we're looking at a sharp pointed object. It's actually like this big, and then it's got bone remodeling around it, at least I've seen. And unless I see differently, what I would state is that's not a sharp pointed object. That is a larger object hitting something. So it's not indicative of a sharp pointed object. And also the other thing I would state is that you can get a sharp pointed object well before you get Homo sapiens. Neanderthals had sharp pointed objects. And Neanderthals have spears, and there's even some evidence that Neanderthals might have been able to use an atlatl, though not there was something else, and I can't think of it off the top of my head. Anyways, but there is some evidence that Neanderthals could have used atlatls in their bones, but there's no evidence really of human on human violence until about 10,000 years ago. We do see a couple of things that could possibly be that, but they could possibly be other things like this. That could possibly be violence of one human to another. It does not look like it's a sharp point. It does not look like it's a sharp cut from what I saw, the bone in the documentary. But just because we have that doesn't necessarily mean that it came from that. It could be a cat's tooth, right? It could be a puncture from an animal. We don't have evidence of an actual point embedded in bone. At 20,000 years ago, we do have evidence of a point embedded in a thigh bone, point being a flint-knapped spearhead or arrowhead. We see that the point embedded in the thigh bone at 20,000 years ago is a spear point. This could be a couple of different things. Again, this could be a hunting accident. This could be a flint knapping accident. This could be human on human violence, right? Sorry, I need a drink. But it is not clear evidence of human on human violence. And again, that one is 20,000 years. So this is after the Neanderthals. By even the most conservative estimates have been gone for 10,000 years, right? And so the first absolute evidence we see is in Kenya at 10,000 years ago. We see a massacre, 8 people. And we see that a pregnant woman was tied into a sitting position, and that there are small children and adults, young adults, but no teens in the massacre. So they believe that they took any preteens or teens with them. And it's 8 individuals. This would probably be a village. It's along a river, or what was a river in Kenya. And then we see in Egypt at about 9,000, maybe it's 6,000 years. I need to double check Saqqara's earliest dating. Saqqara's cemetery goes back pre-Egypt. And in Sakata Cemetery, we see that there are two people with 21 points, arrow points, embracing, and 21 arrow points in the two bodies between them. And so this is absolutely evidence of human on human violence. But these are our first evidences of human on human violence in the archaeological record. So, J-Bone, I would like you to give evidence of that. There's no evidence of that. There's no evidence that we had interspecies violence. We actually have more evidence that we fucked everything we found instead of fought it. We have 7 other species within our DNA. Literally every time we came across another species, we had sex with it. We didn't fight it. So there's no evidence of that. And my evidence is all sources in the link tree in my bio. You're welcome to go and look at them. But unless you have sources, you don't have evidence of that. You have your opinion. And that's incorrect. And your opinion is based on the idea of original sin. Your opinion is based on the idea that we're innately evil or innately violent. And innately, we are nurturing and communal and curious. We're not innately evil. We're not innately violent. We are not innately out to hurt each other. We're innately out to help each other. We're innately out to help nature. It's your idea that we're special and separate that gives us this innate violence that you think is there that is not. And it's all based on, really, really, that othering that we see that narcissistic god kings create about 10,000 years ago in their need to maintain superiority over other people, the need to maintain some people working for them. Will they maintain their right to sit on high and be served, right? 23andMe and Ancestry, the DNA doesn't give you a full genomic sequence, and their comparative stuff compares you to modern populations, not ancient populations. So if it tells you you're Turtle Island indigenous, it's comparing you to current Turtle Island indigenous populations that have a lot of admixture within them, and a lot of Turtle Island indigenous people actually won't submit their DNA to things like that. So you're going to have a hard time getting that anyways. You can take those files and upload them. There's 3 sites that are in the link tree in my bio. It's all the way at the down or at the bottom. There are DNA sites that you can upload the GED file from, and it will give you a better history. Only goes back 5,000 years. I go back further than 5,000 years. And what I'm telling you is that 10,000 years ago, narcissistic god kings come into play. And when we see the narcissistic god kings starting to come into play is when we start to see this cycle of othering and violence. And we start to see the cycling of othering and violence so they can maintain power. Really, because my degree and all the archaeological journals say that I am correct. Sorry, don't like it, don't care. There's sources. There's all of them that you would need to go and find the information on yourself. And you're basing it off of written history, propaganda. You're basing it off of propaganda because that's all written history is propaganda. I predate history. I predate your propaganda. My sources are scientific. I don't need propaganda to tell me what happened when I have science to tell me what happened. No, laugh all you want because I find it amusing. Okay, so let's get on to the next 2 things. Yeah, because I'm seeing a lot of that. Let's go ahead and go into that. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the comments so that it makes it easier. Just turn them all off for a second to make it easier. Let's go into the last 2 of these. I'm going to start with women leading in the church. So we're currently finding a lot of finds that show that the early Christian leaders are actually women. The most recent one that we have, you probably came across this as this very stunning necklace that comes out of England. It comes across, let me actually show you some of the pictures. Because once you see them, you'll go, oh yeah, I saw that. It come across in the news and you're looking at a necklace like this, right? And when they're looking at it, they're putting it together So it's looking like, oh, come on. There we go. Like this in the end, but this is what they find. This is the found piece. It's a little bit blurry, right? So what they're stating with this isn't a find that's in the 600s. It's in England. And this find, there's actually within this grave, let me show you this actually. This is the last thing that they found within the grave. And this is showing a cross. They actually found faces within this cross. It's pretty kind of cool. But this is, they haven't excavated the cross itself yet because it's very fragile, and they're working on it. But this is an early church leader is what they're showing this as. And this is a woman. They've DNA tested the teeth, because what it was they found teeth, and we're looking at 630 to 670 common era, which means current era after Christ. And what we're looking at is this mixing of pagan beliefs and Christian beliefs. In this time period, we are looking at a lot of mixing of pagan beliefs and Christian beliefs as Christianity. So again, if you haven't been in my prior lives, let me touch. So we don't see Christianity start until we see Constantine in 400. And when Constantine comes in 400, Constantine is part of this triumvirate in Rome. There's 3 emperors of Rome at this time, and Constantine doesn't want to be part of a triumvirate. So in his attempts to not be part of a triumvirate, there is this religion that's kind of been growing within the Roman community. And what it is there is this oppressed man, a colonized man who was trying to save his own faith, right? His faith was kind of skidding sideways and following Roman thought process and idolatry, giving gold, the thought process that God needed gold and all of these things. And he's trying to school his people. This is not the way God taught us. That's not what David said. That's not what, Moses said. That's not what Yahweh says. Please don't do this. And in this, his people get angry and they decide to kill him. We all know the story of Jesus, right? But we see that early Judeo-Christians are early Romans who are actually fascinated by this idea, right? We're talking of usually women who in Roman times are property, right? Women are very much property because they get this from the Greeks, right? Their toxic patriarchy comes from the Greeks. And we see that women are very attracted to this idea that saving comes from being submissive to people, right? Because they're being forced to being submissive. And so this idea that there might be this afterlife that gives them something that they're not going to get on the planet because the planet's trying to kill them anyways, right? And so we see that this starts developing in Rome, and it gets a lot of criticism, and it's developing in Rome because, nobody wants the slaves to, feel good enough to move on, right? But we see that Constantine uses this in 400. And when he uses this in 400, what he does in 400 is he already has pretty much conquered half of Eurasia, and the Roman people have. And so he institutes this as a state religion. He doesn't convert until his deathbed. But when he institutes this as a state religion, what he's instituting is a singular government leadership, right? And in instituting this singular government leadership, it spreads across Western Eurasia at this time. And in this spread across Western Eurasia at this time, it takes the pagan beliefs that are in this space, the indigenous animistic beliefs that are in this space at the time, and it converts them into Christianity. It steals their gods and appropriates them. It steals their culture and it appropriates it. And it does all of this so that Constantine can be a singular ruler, so that Constantine can get rid of this triumvirate. Again, he himself doesn't convert until his deathbed, but he does run the Council of Nicaea that throws out half of the texts of Christianity and half of the texts of the Torah, throws out half of the biblical texts, and we don't see those come about until much later. I mean, you can read the Gospel of Mary now, you can read the Gospel of Judas now, the Gospel of Thomas. You can find all of these Gospels now, but these Gospels were kind of thrown out for a long period. And when he does this, he also eradicates science and he eradicates medicine, because God's jealous and God does not want you to question him. And if you question him, then you might see that he's not real. And so, or see that maybe it's not okay to kill people, or, that you might see things if you question God, and you might become more human and more humane if you question God's narcissism. And so we see that science is eradicated. And we also see that medicine is eradicated because it's playing God, right? If you're going to save somebody, if God wants somebody to die, they just need to die because God wants them to die. You shouldn't play God and save them, right? And in this eradication that moves across Europe, what we see is this period of change. We know that Christianity really doesn't hit England, Britain, until later, right? Because what we're seeing is that Rome pulls out in 400 and Anglo-Saxons move in, right? And when the Romans pull out of the Celtic territories of Britain and the Anglo-Saxons move into the Celtic territories of Britain, the Anglo-Saxons are a Germanic people. They worship Donner, Thor, and Odin, right? So they are a Anglo-Saxon Germanic people. They bring in their Germanic beliefs. They bring in their Germanic cycles. They mix with the Celtics that are there, or the Celtic beliefs that are there already. Of course, there's a lot of conquering in this, and there's a lot of issue, right? But what we see is that it takes Rome a couple hundred years. Man, really, it's not Rome itself that comes into Britain. It's Christianity that enters into Britain, dominated by the Roman Church. And we see that that doesn't really happen until about late 500s, early 600s. Because again, we see that Christianity becomes a state religion in Rome in the 400s, and it spreads throughout Roman dominated areas in the 400s. But well, there is a constant influx and a constant trade in all of these areas. Okay. That's another thing that people need to realize. We were constantly influxed. We were constantly trading. There is constant admixture. There is constant travel. There is constant movement between Africa, Europe, Asia. All of this is a constant movement. Okay. And while there's this constant movement, these new ideas are being introduced. Traders are coming in, merchants are coming in, migrants are coming in. And as people are doing these things, people are running from the church and running from, well, not from the church, but running from the Romans, right? And they're bringing in Christianity. So you see that Christianity really starts to take over late 500s, early 600s, though it doesn't become predominant. It doesn't become a common until about 900 in Britain, right? Maybe 800. Alfred the Great. When you see that Alfred the Great unites Britain, you see that Alfred the Great, or maybe it's Edward, one of the two kings right there. They're like grandfather and grandson. But one of those two kings, when they unite all of the kingdoms, Wessex, Mercia, Sussex, all of these different kingdoms into one kingdom of England, England, you see that it is in that uniting that we also see Christianity start to take over. And again, what we're seeing is singular leader, singular church, because I'm a singular leader and I want to unite everybody under my reign and put this idea of a singular person in charge. I'm using a monotheistic idea because I want to support a mono reign, right? And so we see that this monotheistic church idea really supports singular reign. But what we don't often understand is that this movement at this time is not men. This movement at this time is predominantly women. And the reason that this movement at the time is predominantly women is because this religion speaks primarily to women and slaves. Because this religion primarily states, be submissive. If you are meek, if you submit to your master, if you submit to the king, if you submit to the emperor, if you submit to God, if you are meek, you will inherit the earth. What they refrain from saying is that nobody wants to inherit this earth in their religion. This earth is a stopping place. They're all trying to get to their true home in heaven, right? So the meek people are going to remain behind and inherit earth. Well, the rich people are going to make their home in heaven, right? What they're failing to state and what they're failing to show is that this is really just a way to keep subservience and power, right? This is just really another way to confirmed the idea that a man should be in charge of everybody, that one person should have this rulership over everybody. And we also see that this early Christian church actually creates this, it switches the othering. Before, the othering is between nations. Now the othering is between religion. By 600, we do see that Islam has started to become in play. Islam starts in around the 600s. Islam starts with Muhammad, and Islam starts because Muhammad is like, this is not serving me. Your religion is not serving me. It's gone sideways, right? And it actually comes out of Judaism. It doesn't come out of Christianity. But you see that Muhammad is like, this isn't serving me. This is what I want it to be. You also see that Muhammad creates a religion that is based way more on love than Christianity is. Christianity is based on control. Christianity is based on the reason I should be in charge of you and the reason you should die for me, right? Whereas Islam is based on teaching and loving God. And Islam is based on teaching caring for each other, right? There are less words of hate in the Quran than there are in the Bible. There are more words of love in the Quran than there are in the Bible. And you absolutely see, especially at this time, and especially before the split, because when Muhammad dies, you see a split of Sunni and Shiite. And that split has to do with the people who inherit the church from him, who inherit the faith from him. And they go two separate ways. I think they're two generals of his. I can't remember. I think one might be a son or one might be a stepson, but I can't remember for sure. But you definitely see that it goes two different ways in that split. But this is after the death of Muhammad. But Muhammad teaches love and he teaches community. And even after in this split, what you see is that Islam allows science, Islam allows medicine, and Islam allows you to practice your own faith. Islam doesn't demand that you convert like Christianity ends up doing. Christianity from the very beginning is a forced conversion. You see that as Christianity rolls across Europe, Christianity forces conversion on people. Christianity will force conversion through pain. It crucifies people to convert them. It truly believes that if you don't believe in my God, then I can kill you. And we see that Christianity really uses that as it goes down the line. It uses that for slavery. You didn't believe in my God, so I have the right to enslave you because I'm saving your soul by enslaving you, right? What we see, though, is that the early leaders are almost all women. And this is one of those examples. We see very few men in the early church, and the men that we see in the early church are almost always prior slaves. And again, this comes from the fact that this is literally deemed a slave's religion in its infancy, right? So we're talking about a religion that comes from a Judaic people who are conquered, right? Jerusalem is conquered at this time. The Romans rule Jerusalem at this time, and most of their people are enslaved. And so we're talking about it starting out of a group of people who are enslaved, and we're talking about it translating over to the slaves of Rome before it translates over to Rome as a state religion. And so you absolutely see that this starts as a slave's religion. It's documented as starting as a slave's religion. So your early male leaders are all slaves, and your early leaders that are not slaves are all coming from the feminine side of Rome. And usually the feminine aristocracy. I'm butchering that word. Aristocracy. Yeah, I'm not going to say it today. I know it, but I'm not going to say it today, apparently. But we see that it comes from the higher ranking females. And this is because the higher ranking females have the education to know some shit, but they're also looking around going, why the fuck am I being, why am I a broodmare, right? Like they're also looking around going, why am I a broodmare? And when you see this, you absolutely see that this is where we get all of our early leaders. We see this in all the records. God, I want to say Pamela, Paloma, something like that, who dies in the arena, right? Like we see a lot of the early Christian leaders are this. We also know that at this time, and a lot of this is because women lead everywhere else. The only places that women don't lead are places that are descended from Greeks' toxic patriarchy. Okay. Greeks' toxic patriarchy comes from the fact that Greeks would rather have sex with teenage boys than they would with adult women. And because the Greeks would rather have sex with teenage boys, in fact, they view homoerotic love as being the pinnacle of love. When and by that I mean not sex or intimacy with equal men. They're not talking about two adult men when they look at homoerotic love. What they are looking at is a dominant male and a submissive male. And that submissive male is always a young man. Okay. So what we're looking at is not homosexual, but what we're looking at is pedophilic. Okay. I want to be very specific about it. They call it homoerotic love, and they state that homoerotic love is the purest love. Okay. But I want to specify that we are not talking about being homosexual. We are talking about being pedophilic. Okay. And so, in their pedophilic nature, what they do is they demean women, they make women less than, right? Because if I can make women less than, then it's okay that I'm having sex with young boys instead. They'll even make women dress as young men so that they can have sex with them, so that they can procreate with them without having to have sex with a woman, because women are deemed evil and women are deemed ick because they need to justify their pedophilic behavior. And we see that this translates into the Romans. Julius Caesar's son, our adopted son, was his lover as well. Like, he mentored him, and Roman mentorship was to take a young man, a teenage boy, and mentor him sexually, as well as mentor him through the military campaign or mentor him through politics, right? And so we absolutely see that when the Bible starts to take place and we see this translation, we absolutely see that the Roman church actually removes pedophilia and replaces it with homosexuality, right? So the early Bible is not stating, the Torah is not stating it's not okay to have sex with other men. What it's in fact stating is it's not okay to have sex with children. And because the Romans did not view having sex with a teenage boy the same as they viewed having sex with another man, they wanted it to be okay to have sex with this teenage boy. They did not want it to be okay to have sex with another man, because they didn't think sex with another man was okay. They thought that sex with a child was okay, but they didn't believe that sex with another adult male was okay. And so they changed this verbiage. And make pedophilia legal within the Catholic Church, while making homosexuality illegal within the Catholic Church. And this spreads. We see that pedophilia is still legal within Christianity today. Like, it's not only legal, it's supported. Marry 'em young, old enough to bleed, old enough to breed, all of these different things that we've heard throughout history, right? So we absolutely see that as Rome is spreading this religion, we're seeing groups of people who are led by women, right? We see Zenobia is a queen in Palmyra who is the descendant of Cleopatra VII, right? She is the great granddaughter of Cleopatra VII, and she defeats the Romans. Boudica is the queen of the Iceni. After the Romans rape her 12 and 11-year-old daughters, gang rape her 12 and 11-year-old daughters, Boudica goes to war against the Romans, right? And so she kills massive amounts of Romans and almost completely drives them out of Britain. The Romans actually fear Boudica greatly because Boudica is this extremely strong Roman or warrior woman. We see that the Scythians are actually the Amazons. We found this out recently with grave sites. We can see that the warrior graves of the Scythian warriors are actually women, like DNA genetically women. And so we see really there, this goes all the way up until places are Christianized. Every space across the globe has women leading and has women in war until they are Christianized. We see that in the 900s, the greatest warrior grave that we've ever found in Scandinavian is actually female, right? So we know that women in Viking times are not only fighting, right, but are leading. And the greatest leader that the Vikings ever had was in fact female, or at least that we have found archaeologically was in fact female, right? So we see that women are very much a part of the leadership within every culture as Christianity is spreading. And so having women leading within the church makes a lot of sense. It's common for women to lead in these areas. And so having women enter as leaders into a space where it's common for women to lead gives an equal standing, right? Gives a repertoire, gives an exchange of knowledge on a lot easier. Hi, sorry guys. Oh, nice, Wicked. But we absolutely see that this gives it a lot easier. They give the ability to convert through kindness, whereas mass conversions are happening through different things like crucifixions, right? Or there are tales of boiling people, tales of, lashing people to death, tales of forcing them to eat poisonous snakes, like hold them in their mouths. I mean, there are tales of just horrific tortures of conversion that we see throughout Christianity's time. But in those early times, before it becomes this strictly male dominated, women are less than cattle in God's eyes, we see that women are leading within the church, just like women are leading everywhere else, and leading in war as well. And then the last one that everybody was asking about. Yes, Europe is mainly Black until about 5,000 years ago. What we see is that Cheddarman behind me is pretty much what settles Europe. We see at 10,000 years ago, this is Cheddarman. We see at 6,000 years ago when Scandinavia is settled, it's settled by two groups, one that looks like Cheddarman and one that's dark-eyed and light-skinned, which is the Sami and the Finnic people today, right? Who haven't really translated their skin color. Their skin color is still pretty, light, but it's darker than the people who started out really dark, right? Like, so if you got a group that's going in like this with blue eyes and dark skin, and they are the blue-eyed and extremely fair, like translucent fair people we see in the area today. And then you have another group that's settling that's dark-eyed and light-skinned, and we look at their skin today and it's not as translucent as the people who are descended from the darker skin, right? So what we see is that Cheddarman's phenotype is what settles, excuse me, I'm something in my eye. Cheddarman's phenotype is what we see settles Eurasia. And we see this happening as Eurasia starts to get settled. So first, it is not often understood, but we don't leave Africa completely and make it out of the Levant area as Homo sapiens until 50,000 years ago. And what we see is that going up into Europe, we see that 50,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago in Europe, right? So if you're looking at Eurasia, and here is your Mediterranean, and here is your Arctic, right? What you're seeing is down here along the Mediterranean, you get 50,000 years ago. Up above, you get about 40,000 years ago. Up into northwestern Eurasia is roughly 30,000 years ago, like France, okay? And then after that, 35,000 years ago, I think is some of the oldest finds in France of Homo sapiens. After that, you see that England isn't out from underneath the ice. It starts leaving the ice at 27,000 years ago and doesn't fully leave the ice until about 9,000, 10,000 years ago. And that's northern Britain. Ireland doesn't leave the ice or lose all of its ice until about 8,000 years ago. And again, Scandinavia doesn't lose all its ice until, well, I'd say between 8 and 6,000 years ago. And as we see people moving up into these areas as they're clearing from ice, what we're seeing is that the groups that are moving up in, excuse me, predominantly look like Cheddarman. We do see that there's a couple different groups language-wise that are moving in. One is that Proto-Indo-European, and one is Finno-Ugaric, which is, did I say that right? Finno-Ugaric. Anyways, which is coming up from, so here's the Levant area. We're all here for like 150,000 years, and then we start moving up, right? And a lot of us stay in this area. This really has like our earliest cities are in Turkey, or not cities, our earliest like temples are in Turkey, and it looks like our earliest stone villages are in Turkey right now. This is latest finds. But so we're looking in this area in the Levant, and as you're coming up, you have people coming up over into Asia, and you have people coming over into Europe, right? And as the people are coming up over into Asia, you see that the language, the Indo-European, actually goes into India and it goes kind of over here, but you see that there's a Finno-Ugric language that starts in Middle Eurasia, middle, I guess it's Near East, but along the line, like that division further up, not in the Mediterranean vision, probably where Russia is right now, right? I'm not very geographically sound, unfortunately. And we see the Finno-Ugric language moving up and going up through Asia and then over, right? It goes up more like through the steppes and the Siberian areas, right? And then over. And so we see the Indo-European comes over and then up. And so this is where these two are meeting in Scandinavia. So it's the Finno-Ugric descent that is the light-skinned, dark-eyed people moving in at 7,000 years ago into Scandinavia. Actually, I think their newest, oldest find is 7,000 years ago, and it's like a fishware in Scandinavia. But moving up into Scandinavia at that time, and then you see the dark-skinned, light-eyed people that are the same group of people that Cheddarman actually is a part of, moving up into Scandinavia at the same time, and they meet in Scandinavia, basically. Now, what we see is that it takes about 100 generations for an adaptation to happen. And so within Homo sapiens, that's about 2,500 years. We count every generation as about 25 years. It might have been 20 years, 10,000 years ago, right? 20 years might have been the full development of the brain 10,000 years ago. So say knock off 500 years, say 2,000 years if we're going 10,000 years ago, looking at 2,000 years for a genetic adaptation, not a genetic adaptation, for an environmental adaptation. And that's what skin color is. Skin color is an environmental adaptation of the melanin content in your skin based on several different allele factors that we all have. No matter what your skin is, you have the allele factors for dark, you have the allele factors for light. Some of them are recessive genes, some of them are dominant genes. The dominant genes are what's showing. But based on these allele factors, we see that there is this adaptation for environment. And this adaptation for environment happens along equatorial regions. Everything has to do with the region that you're in. But the reason that we know that light skin is not a genetic advantage or a species advantage is because of the fact that it doesn't work everywhere. Black skin works everywhere. Light skin does not. Dark skin will work everywhere. You will need to have a higher influx of vitamin D. But you can get vitamin D from plants, right? You can get vitamin D from other things. And so you can actually use dark skin everywhere. Light skin, you cannot take into a heavy sun area before all of our before all of our things that we've done, right? Fuck, I have the word and it's just not working today. But before that, before things like sunscreen and hats and clothing, right? Which they had clothing, but the ability to cover their whole body, right? Before that, you're not seeing that you can take light skin into high sun content area and have livability, have the ability to pass on your genetics to the next generation. Light skin actually is where we get the predominance of our skin cancer because we don't have protection from the UV, right? And so if you take light skin into a sun heavy area, you're going to end up with cancer more likely. We see this means that light skin is not a genetic advantage. Dark skin is a genetic advantage. Light skin, it's not a mutation, it's an adaptation. It's an adaptation to the amount of sun and cloud cover in the environment that you are in. There is some recent finding that light skin might actually help retain heat. So it might actually be good for heat retention, whereas dark skin might help dispel heat. And that's a possibility. We do know that the skin itself, it's our largest organ. It's our epidermis, and it's our largest organ on our body, and it serves many functions. And one of them is heat retention and heat dissipation. The amount of skin you have to have has something to do with how you retain it or dissipate it, right? And the body structure. And so we absolutely see that, dark skin really worked everywhere. We adapted over thousands of years. So we're starting out like this at 10,000 years ago. We know that until about 5,000 years ago, which KYA means thousands of years ago, till about 5,000 years ago, maybe 6,000 years ago, we do not see light skin as an equal part of the population, like 50-50 until about 5,000 years ago, right? And we don't see light skin become most of the population until 2,000 years ago. And at the time that the sagas are written, or the time that the sagas are written about, dark skin is still actually pretty prevalent within Scandinavia. Egil is dark of skin. There are several other people within the sagas who are dark of skin. We also see the same thing happening within Britain, right? That there are still dark skinned people. We also are seeing that there is a huge migration all the time. There's this constant influx, like 700 CE, so 700 Common Era. There is an 11-year-old girl in Britain who is buried with her aunts. Her aunts are Central Northern European, and she's like 73% Central Northern European and 33% Nairobian, West African. I think they said Nairobian, but I know it's West African, right? So we're seeing that there is this constant trade, migration, movement between all of these communities. Okay, so that's where we get Europe was mainly Black and women lead in the early church. I'm going to go ahead and turn comments back on for a little bit. I didn't remind everybody last time, I don't do racism in my chat. I work very hard. My field created the theory of race, and my field debunked the theory of race. Race does not exist. It's a colonial construct. And I don't deal with your issues like being shitty about it very well. So don't bring racism in my chat. Same thing with any phobias based on gender and desire. I don't deal with those well. You will not like my response. I ask kindness. I give kindness and I ask it in return. This is how we're supposed to be, right? That's who we are innately. And if we could get back to that state, we'd actually do so much better for our species and for this planet. And so I do ask that you give the kindness that is natural to us as humans. And, you know, we should be giving anyways. Pretty much every faith even teaches that, right? Some faiths teach it, but don't practice it. But pretty much every faith teaches it. And so I ask for that. And then I'll probably turn it on subscribers only so I can read back through them after a minute or two. Thank you everybody for contributing, and thank you to the new subscribers. I really appreciate that. And then I'm going to go ahead and take off around 10. I have an appointment today at 11, and I'm trying to keep my lives to about 2 hours or under, or 2 hours or just above, just because it gets too much. I didn't say there weren't any white in people in Europe. What I said was that dark skin was predominant, and that's how it all starts, and that it took time to get to the point of light skin. But dark skin is absolutely predominant in the start. I love you guys too. Thank you so much. Admixture. So Neanderthal DNA is admixture. Denisovian DNA is admixture. Admixture is little bits of other species or little bits of other groups of people. We all have like this very extensive admixture within us. It just kind of translates. Like it's very hard to find somebody who doesn't have any admixture from either another species or another space on the globe, right? It just doesn't really happen. And we got that prior to colonialism. We've got admixture from all these other species, but admixture is just basically the way we phrase having little bits of other species and little bits of groups within everybody. I don't really do a lot of book recommendations because for my field, a lot of times by the time books come out or published, this shit's been like debunked. Clan of the Cave Bear, I really like because I think Clan of the Cave Bear really shows a very human side of humanity. I would state, though, that it's very outdated. We know now that Neanderthals speak, right? We know that Earth's Children's series got a couple of things wrong, but that was the current science at the time, right? I haven't read through Sapiens yet. I've heard a lot of recommendations, but again, I would say that if you're going to read that, understand that we did not kill off the Neanderthals, and I've heard that that's what Sapiens states. In the link tree in my bio are a lot of links to journal articles. There are links to lectures and different interviews done by paleoanthropologists and stuff like that that can give you a lot of information that's current. I am going to start putting a couple books that I love, but they're not necessarily books based on this stuff. They're books based more on concepts and thought processes to kind of give the ability to shift your thought process out of a colonial concept into a different concept. Well, okay, so light skin is selected for adaptation in certain areas. Good morning. I love my coffee. Um, but uh, again, light skin is not an advantage. It's only an advantage in specific areas. You can't take it anywhere else, which means it's not an advantage, a genetic advantage, just so we know, and just so that's understood. And it really has to do with where you are at in the equator. So, this is a really good example. We like to think of Turtle Island Indigenous people as all one group of people, right? But Turtle Island Indigenous people go from very light up in the Arctic to extremely dark on the equator, right? And they're all, genetically they've been mixing and migrating and moving throughout time, right? And you see that, well, there's several influxes into Turtle Island with later understanding. We have several influxes into Turtle Island, and there seems to be some backward migration too. That the X1 mitochondrial DNA starts in Turtle Island and then goes to Siberia, right? So there is some backwards and forwards, but we do see that, like, the Dene language group. The Dene language group spreads, goes from the southern tip of Mexico up until the Midwest, right? Like, it is such a wide language group, and there's a range of color. Not only does it go from the southern tip of Mexico up to the Midwest, but that language group is also the coastline up into Canada and up into the Arctic of the Pacific Northwest, right? Those are where you see the Dene language groups, right? Like the Indo-European language group over in Europe. So what you're seeing is groups that are originally one culture, but you're seeing very different shades depending on the latitude that these groups are in. So when we look at skin tone, we have to understand that skin tone is specific to latitude. It has nothing to do with anything else. It is about the latitude that you're in. And you'll see in Asia that you can go from extremely light to extremely dark on the same longitude in Asia by the latitude. I don't know who you think the enemy is. Sorry. Yes, and that is one thing I wanted to say because I saw it come across. Race is a colonial concept. So Caucasian. Now, first of all, I need you to understand that we think Caucasian is Northern European, but Caucasian is not Northern European. Caucasian is the Caucasus Mountains, which are down like near Turkey, in the Middle East. And it's through the Levant area, like Judaic people and Arabic people are Caucasian, and it goes across northern Africa. So Egyptian is Caucasian. All of North Africa is Caucasian. So that's what Caucasian means. That's the definition for Caucasian. If you're looking at the concept of race theory has been debunked. Race does not exist, it is a colonial construct. But Caucasian within that theory is not what you think it is, unfortunately. It is actually much darker than most people think, right? And so, where do I think that I can't say because the race doesn't exist, right? And it's not the group of people you think it is. Where do I see us evolving as a whole? Because we're going to evolve as a whole. We're not going to evolve in separate spaces because we're not evolving in separate spaces. We're constantly influx with each other now. And we're never isolated from each other now. So there's not going to be any speciesization into new species, right? So we will evolve as a whole. Do I think that we will? We are currently evolving. And I absolutely see us evolve to be better for oxygen if we survive the next 100 years, right? That's cool, 4-4. Bengal. So when modern humans bred with Neanderthal, we're the first generation of males sterile. So when we mixed with Neanderthals and when we mixed with Denisovian, none of the males passed on their genetics really. Um, well, okay, so we do see Neanderthal Y DNA, and we do believe that the matings were with Neanderthal males and um, Homo sapien females, right? And that those are the ones that produced offspring that were able to produce offspring. So we know that we bred for 100,000 years in the Levant with the Neanderthals. And we know that the Denisovians and the people who eventually came to Turtle Island mixed for about 10,000 years. They have Turtle Islanders have 0.02 to 0.03 Denisovian DNA, and we can rate that as a 10,000 year mixing. And the reason is because, so think of horses and donkeys. Horses and donkeys can produce offspring sometimes, not every breeding. And the offspring that they produce is mules. When they produce mules, mules are most often sterile. One in every 500, one in every 1,000 is going to be non-sterile and going to and be able to produce offspring. It is always female, and it always has to breed with I think it's a horse. Like it has to breed back with the prior species. It can't breed with another mule because there are no male mules who are able to produce offspring who are not sterile. So think the same thing's happening with us. You're going to see that one in every few hundred is going to be fertile and able to pass on the genetics. And we most often seem to see that it is a female, and that it is the combination of a male Neanderthal and a female Homo sapien that produces a female that is able to pass on the genetics of both species. It's not a hypothesis that humankind starts in Africa. It's a current theory that humankind starts in Africa, supported by all evidence currently. There is no evidence of us starting anywhere else. None whatsoever at all. All the evidence states that we start in Africa. 7 million years ago is the earliest in Africa. We do see where the missing link, one of them might have been in Greece, but that's at 7.2 million years ago when our first hominin is in Africa. All hominins descend from hominins in Africa, period. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put this on subscriber only so that I can read through these comments. We've only got about 13 more minutes, and then I'm going to go ahead and take off because I have other things today. But let me go ahead and read through these comments. Ariman, I'm going to ask you about that later on, please, because that's South America, and I would really like to be able to pronounce that correctly. And I'm seeing it as Abayala, but I'm not positive, and it's very important to me, especially with indigenous languages, to pronounce it correctly. So I might hit you up on that one later. I appreciate that. Um, We have so we have 7 other species that bred with Homo sapien, to be more specific. And 5 of them are ghost species, and 2 of them are Neanderthal and Denisovian. Ghost species are species where we see the genetic imprint in our DNA, but we don't have a full genome, and we haven't found them in the fossil record. So I didn't say North Africa is white Nubian. What I stated is that Caucasian race again does not exist. It's a colonial construct, but Caucasian isn't white. We think of Caucasian as white, like Northern European, but Caucasian is actually stated as being like the Middle East, the Levant, the Arabian Peninsula, and North Africa. That's what Caucasian is stated as. That's what it's identified as. It all comes from that Caucasus region. And the idea that we were all in that area originally, that's kind of the oldest areas of Homo sapiens, right? outside of Africa and outside of where we speciate at in South Africa, right? These are our oldest spaces. And actually, humans have been in the Nile Valley since Homo habilis. Homo habilis was in the Nile Valley. So, like, 2.5 million years humans have been in the Nile Valley. But, and it's also where you're going to see that region is also where you're going to see the first light skin within Homo sapiens, really, because of the fact that that's the region where they bred with Neanderthals. And so that's the region that they're getting that light skin from Neanderthals. And as they're moving back into Africa, because they take the Neanderthal DNA into Africa, Africa has Neanderthal DNA everywhere except for two spaces within Africa, one in West Africa and one in South Africa. The Khoisan people, who have the highest genetic diversity of the entire human population, are the oldest population on the planet and are the original population, right? So every place except for those two places has Neanderthal DNA, but the Caucasus region and this Levant, Caucasus, Arabian Peninsula, North African range is actually where we first see light skin within Homo sapiens. And this is what we call Caucasian. Caucasian isn't white. We like to think Caucasian looks like me, but Caucasian doesn't look like me. And what I mean by race isn't real is race is a construct that was developed after Turtle Island was landed in. And it was developed to try and justify the atrocities that white people were committing at this time. It was developed after they found science again, after they had eradicated science within their group for 1,200 years, right? And it was appropriated science from other people. And they didn't use tools that are actually scientific tools. And so when science developed and advanced and we got to genomic testing, we realized that race doesn't exist. And how we realize this is there's more genetic differences within a population, more genetic diversity within populations than there are between populations. You're more likely to be more genetically similar with somebody clear across the globe than you are with your next door neighbor, which makes sense because if you and your next door neighbor are really genetically similar, your kids can't have sex and produce good offspring because you become too inbred, right? So you want that genetic diversity within your populations. So you're more genetically diverse within populations than between populations. Family lines matter, right? You're going to see that certain family lines give certain things. Like you might see that certain family lines are more predisposed to being Rh negative or more predisposed to hypertension. This has to do with family lines. This has to do with genetics of your family and your ancestry, not to do with the region or the space that you're in. Race states that the color of your skin dictates what's going on inside your body, and it does not. And the most genetic diversity that we see on the planet actually is in Africa. We see that the most genetic diversity in our species exists within the Khoisan people. And we see that within Africa, you see that you can get every range of skin color in Africa, every range of eye color in Africa, every range of hair texture in Africa, every range of height within Africa, every range of body structure within Africa. We see that race just doesn't exist. It's a colonial construct made to justify white people's atrocities, basically. Culture exists, and I want to double down on that. Culture is important, okay? And culture exists, and racism exists. Unfortunately, way too fucking much. Some of our systems are completely built on racism, like the United States and Canada are completely built on racism. But race itself is a colonial construct to keep white people in power. Again, Nubian, white is not Caucasian. Caucasian and white are two different things, and that was what the statement is that Caucasian does not equal white. We think that white is Caucasian, but Caucasian is actually not white. Caucasian is actually darker. So the five ghost species and the two that we know of, Neanderthal and Denisovian, really confirms to me that we fuck everything, we don't fight it. We really love things that are different. We even see this today. Today we're like, ooh, opposites attract, right? We really love something if it's different. We see this in fetishes. People will fetishize. And when people fetishize, they don't fetishize about people that look like them. They fetishize about people who look different from them, right? You might see, I in particular know a very white dude who fetishizes over dark skinned women, right? We see that fetishes are generally about things that are different than what you are. We see constantly that we have this propensity to like things that aren't like us. We like the unusual. We like something different. And this really goes back. Thank you, Ducray. This really goes back quite far. This goes back as far as us, right? Because we have all those ghost species, because we have Denisovian and Neanderthal, what it shows to get the amount of Neanderthal that we have within us in some spaces at 5%, and the amount of Denisovian that we have within us in some spaces at 6%. What we see is we're looking at 2 to 300,000 years. We're looking at not 2 to 3. We're looking at 100 to 200,000 years of breeding, right? So 100,000 to 200,000 years. We're only 300,000 years old. Right? So like 50,000 years in, we start breeding with everything else around us, right? We're really a fuck it, not fight it species. We really like things that are unusual and we really are attracted to things that look different. And that's what the implication is to me is that we're not into othering, that it's not who we typically are. It's something that was created 10,000 years ago to kind of keep people on top, right? Kind of give that ability to have a god king, that ability to, dominate and harm others. And to give you somebody else to fight except for me. If I'm trying to dominate you, I don't want you to fight me. I want you to fight somebody else. We see this othering today in the US when we talk about immigrants, right? Immigrants are stealing your job. It's not the fact that the government won't pay you decently, right? And immigrants are, taking our illegal immigrants are eating all our food, like they're taking all our welfare. But we know for a fact that welfare is predominantly white women, right? Like it is predominantly white people, not illegal immigrants, not black women, right? So we see this a lot even today. But othering is this need to maintain power. It's somebody's need to maintain power, and we don't see it start till 10,000 years ago. So my understanding is that all species on the planet, even the trees and the bananas, share 95% of their DNA. And we share most of our DNA with each other. There is only like a few little things that pop differently, right? Like phenotypes. Um, but again, those have to do with, space. They don't have to do with even genetics. Because you can see there's a very famous case, the Sandra Lang case, happened during the apartheid in South Africa, where two white parents had a black child, right? And it's absolutely their child. They don't have black ancestry. This is a recessive gene popping. I had this happen. I've got a pair of friends in my 20s who the woman was light of skin, the man was light of skin. He was blonde haired and brown eyed. She had black hair, but she was light of skin. And they had a daughter who was black, like really black, 4C hair, dark skin, black. And he genetically tested. He's like, you cheated, and it was absolutely their child. And they had no recent African ancestry that they knew of. Like there was no DNA, even genetically DNA wise, they had no recent African ancestry, but their daughter was extremely dark. We see this happen frequently, actually. We actually see, well, not frequently, but we do see this happen commonly. And we actually see where you will see dark skinned people having a light child. And most people don't know unless you're darker of skin, but most children are born really light, even if you're dark of skin. I've known people who were like, "That's not my baby. That baby's too light to be my baby," right? And it's the fact that the melanin really takes a minute to set in babies, right? It really takes a minute to get to the melanin content in babies because they're inside that whole time. They don't need it, right? And we've only got like one more minute. I think that's all of it. Okay, so I'm going to turn that comments on really quick as I say goodbye. I will be back on Sunday night. We are doing Sunday nights and Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. and Tuesday mornings and Friday mornings at 8 a.m. for lives currently. Currently streaming on both YouTube and on TikTok. So we'll be back Sunday night at 8 p.m. And then I will be back on Tuesday at 8 a.m. if you need to have that early morning. I enjoy you guys. Thank you so much. I will see you guys soon. I'm sorry. I have an appointment. I have a mental health appointment and I have to go do some work before my mental health appointment. Um, absolutely, Carla. Absolutely. Um, much love. Take care. And I will see you guys all again Sunday night. Hey, Anna. Have a great time. And may your weekend be blessed. If you are in this horror of a snowstorm, the world's just kind of getting worse. We're going to have really hot summers and really cold winters, and just start preparing, and enjoy as much as you can. Much love to everybody. Have a great one. Much love to everybody. Have a great one.